You need to do everything you possibly can to advance 1 week at a time in the fantasy football playoffs. Congratulations on making it through to week 16, but do not get lazy now. Just because you won one game, here are all the players we need to be adding off the waiver wire as soon as we can to continue our streak into week 16 and obviously do the fantasy football championship. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video as well, because I will go over a list of defenses we can stream, plug and play that will put up over 20 fantasy points and single-handedly win us a week. If you guys do appreciate this video and want to be generous today, hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds. It helps me out a ton, but I will never waste your time. The first ad in fantasy football, which is a must add by every single facet, is going to be Jerome Ford. We had him in stash videos earlier. If you don't have him yet, it is still not too late. His roster percentage is still fairly low. I say this because Nick Chubb left last week's matchup against the Chiefs with a leg injury. That turned out to be a broken foot. He's going to be out for the rest of the fantasy football season, the rest of this season, and probably some time to come in the next year as well, but that's besides the point, which means we've locked in an RB1 in Jerome Ford for the rest of the fantasy football season. We need to be getting him for free off the waiver wire. Last week, Jerome Ford put up 18.4 fantasy points with over 100 all-purpose yards and a touchdown against the number one hardest run defense in the entire NFL, being the Kansas City Chiefs. This is insanely impressive, and this is a guy that doesn't have to work up to a 100% snap share. He's already been getting 50% of the snaps the entirety of the season. It's not going to take 2-3 weeks for him to get to that point. On the year, he's been averaging 7.3 carries and 2.7 receptions per game, over 3 targets, again 3.5, which is pretty good, and more importantly, 5.2 yards per carry. Those are very encouraging numbers as an RB2. Now we do have to be a little bit realistic coming into this matchup here, and just with what Jerome Ford is, he's likely not going to come in and see 100% of the snaps, 100% of the touches, and something like what a Tyler Algier or maybe even a Blake Corum would be. If we take a trip to last year's stats, we can see with no Nick Chubb, again, still dealing with his injury, a different one from before, he was splitting 40 to Kareem Hunt's 60. It wasn't a 100-0 situation, but the second best running back in this offense right now is Pierre Strong. He is not the same level as Kareem Hunt, and this is a guy that was with the Browns for 5 seasons, so he's going to get a bit of an increased touch share compared to everybody else. Ford is his team's primary receiving running back, which is very important. We can expect him to get 4 to 5 targets per game and over 10 carries without Nick Chubb for the rest of the year, but he does get really great matchups against the Cincinnati Bengals this week, followed by the Dolphins to finish out the rest of the fantasy football season. Those are ones where we possibly could start him, pick up, and add a free running back one off the waiver wire right now. But my number one tight end ad that I guarantee is available in all of your leagues is going to be Brenton Strange due to the unfortunate season-ending injury of Evan Ingram and his shoulder. And this isn't just a dart throw tight end that we're putting in this video and he could possibly get some points. No, this is a bona fide tight end one. Last week, he comes out 11 receptions, 73 yards at a 27.9% team target share. We know Brian Thomas had a good game, but he was clearing away this number 2 guy against one of the better defenses in the Jets in stopping tight end fantasy points allowed. The Jaguars' offensive scheme is just tight ends, and they use them a lot regardless of who this quarterback is, whether it's Trevor Lawrence, whether it's Mac Jones. The tight end position is targeted on average 10 times a game, and we have to remember that we saw exactly what we can expect from Strange earlier in the year. When Evan Ingram was out from weeks 2 to 5, Strange was the tight end 9 overall out of every single tight end, and he had really tough matchups against the Bills and against the Texans in that stretch. This week, the Jags get a matchup against the Raiders, which is an extremely positive one, allowing the 4th most points to opposing tight ends this year. 13 points to be exact to that position, so it's a great spot to be starting him, and he is a tight end 1 for the rest of the year in an offense that doesn't have a lot of target competition outside of Brian Thomas Jr. Even if you don't need a tight end, it might be a smart idea to go play defense and pick him up so your league mates can't have him if they do need to go get a fill-in guy. But another must add that I promise you, all of these ads of this week are very, very urgent. It's going to be Kendre Miller. He needs to be added regardless of your league size for the main reason that Alvin Kamara left last week's game against the Commanders with a groin injury, leading Miller to see 9 carries for 46 yards and 1 target while playing about 30% of the snaps, not even a full snap share, or at least 50% of it. And he did bring in a ton of life to this offense when he was in, finishing with 5.11 yards per carry, the second straight game where he did see an actual decent amount of touches. We got to keep in mind, these were his first 2 games off of IR. In those 2 games, he's totaled 19 carries for 1 touchdown on very limited snaps to keep in mind. This offense lives and dies by their running back, so he's going to get a ton of usage, especially now that we don't have Taysom Hill in this offense, out for the year with an ACL injury. We don't have to worry about him stealing a bunch of rushing touchdowns at the goal line, but this is less of a severity of Kamara's injury issue than it is more of a Saints situational issue. He has the chance to return in week 16. Again, we don't have a bunch of reports on that just yet against the Packers in that matchup. It's going to be a relatively positive one, but after their loss on Sunday, the Saints fall to 5-9, way out of the playoff picture, and the Buccaneers picked up a win over the Chargers, and it looks like the Falcons have a free win over the Raiders this week. So if the Saints aren't going to be performing for any playoff spot, they don't have anything to play for. They have a bunch of injuries to Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, Derek Carr. Why exactly put Alvin Kamara, a 29-year-old running back into this offense for essentially no reason? he's injured. Let's give Kendre Miller a chance. He's been extremely efficient in his chances, but he has also been dealing with injury on and off IR for the entire season. This could be a spot where they slow down Alvin Kamara for the rest of the year, let Kendre Miller play out, and they do have some pretty positive matchups for the rest of the year. This being the Packers this week, who allow 20 fantasy points a game to their running back position, and at the very least, he's a handcuffed running back in a situation where he should get about 7 to 10 touches a game if Kamara is healthy, and if he's not, he's a useful RB1 in some positive matchups here, again, against the Packers and the Raiders. But if you're looking for a wide receiver, there aren't a ton of them out there right now. A guy left on the waivers that 100% needs to be added is Cedric Tillman, for the main reason that his roster percentage has been dropping because he's been dealing with injury for so long. Tillman has been ruled out for 3.5, you could call it 4, for the game that he did miss weeks due to his concussion, and he's slated to make his return in this week's matchup in one of the best matchups of all time against the Cincinnati Bengals. If we just look at this defense themselves, last week they allowed the Titans to go for 27, a terrible offense with Will Levis at quarterback. The week before that, they let the Cooper Rush-led Cowboys go for 20. The Steelers go for 44. Over their last 5 games, this Bengals defense is allowing 32 points per game to opposing offenses, and in the entirety of the season, they're still allowing 28 points a game. They're a complete liability. If you look at Cam Taylor-Britt, you look at Josh Newton, they are both allowing over a 0.35 fantasy point per route run number and an extremely high QBR every single week. It should be a spot where there's a ton of pass volume for Jameis Winston, which is the number one thing for these wide receivers. Now, he did have his number 1 worst game of his starting career this year, at least against the Chiefs. All things considered, it is one of the tougher defenses in the NFL. He finished with 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 146 yards in the air. That kind of stuff is just going to happen when you have Jameis Winston. Unfortunately, the pass volume wasn't there. But even with that bad game, Jameis Winston is still averaging over 40 passing attempts a game, and there is no shortage of opportunities for these wide receivers, ranked in the number 1 volume offense in the entire NFL. Maybe it's not efficient, but still, the opportunities are going to be there, and this led Cedric Tillman to see 10 targets a game when he was healthy before his concussion after becoming the starter in week 7. And you can suggest with another top wide receiver coming back into this offense for the Browns, maybe they can move the ball a little bit better and just be that much more consistent. Again, against a very bad Bengals secondary for this week, and they get some pretty good matchups for the last 2 weeks of the year as well. We should be looking the way of Kenneth Gainwell, though, if you do need another running back to pick up off the waivers. This coming last week against the Steelers, where Saquon Barkley did miss time. All things considered, it doesn't look to be anything serious. He may carry a questionable tag coming into this week's matchup, but at this point in the season, handcuff running backs are 10 times more valuable because of the hole that not having a starter could leave on your roster. Gainwell did come in on a limited snap share and saw 7 carries for 20 yards, but more importantly, 3 receptions for 40 yards in the air, so it's not a bad day by all means against a pretty tough defense in the Steelers. And he's been seeing about 4 carries a game on a 25% snap share for the entirety of the season behind Saquon. So again, if he does miss time, it's a 1-to-1 fill-in for Kenneth Gainwell. There's not really going to be any other running backs involved, and he doesn't have to work up to a 50, then 60, then 70, then 90% snap share because he's already been in this offense. He's been on the team for a few years. Now, again, all of this is in question of if Saquon is going to play or not. I expect him to play, but the Eagles do get the Commanders on Sunday, followed by the Cowboys in the Fantasy Football Championship. So if anything does go down, Kenneth Gainwell is going to be a great running back. At the very least, add him as insurance for Saquon Barkley if that does happen. But a name that we do need to be adding, I promise you have not heard in an extremely long amount of time, is going to be Hollywood Brown. Again, we haven't heard this name in forever, but he's slated to make his NFL return against the Texans this week in Week 16. Hollywood Brown was cleared to come back to practice on Friday from the doctors after his shoulder injury and the shoulder surgery that he ended up getting. And according to reporters, he looked quick and pretty much impressive to make his return in Week 16. Now, if he does come back in that time frame, he will definitely be worked in and not get a full snap count immediately. But with these wide receivers coming off injuries that weren't low body issues, it shouldn't take a super long amount of time for him to work up to his regular snap share. So he won't put up crazy numbers in his first game back, especially if we don't have Patrick Mahomes. He is also dealing with injury coming into this week. He gets a matchup against the Texans. It's very, very positive. Top 5 to fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, followed by the Steelers in Week 17. A little bit negative, but again, keep your eye on him. But now it's time for the defenses. We need to be adding and plugging and playing in this Week 16 matchup here. The first one is going to be the Bills, easily number 1. Their roster percentage has been plummeting due to the matchup against the Lions that they got last week. It's not a negative one. You don't want to be starting any defense that faces the Lions because of how good they are and how much they score. But now they're coming into this week's matchup against the New England Patriots. This team has been one of the least efficient in the entire NFL. Drake May is averaging 1 interception a game since being named the starter, and the Bills defense is one of the better defenses when it comes to defending against the pass. They didn't do good against the Lions last week, again, it's the Lions, but this should be a spot where they can completely contain the Patriots offense. They also get the Jets in Week 17 as well, so if you can get your hands on them, you can stash them for the rest of the fantasy football season. But the Packers are going to be another one that are coming into an amazing matchup in Week 16 against the New Orleans Saints. This is a team that probably won't have Alvin Kamara, has no Taysom Hill, has no Derek Carr, has none of their wide receivers. It is an extremely one-dimensional offense. They're averaging 15.6 points per game as a total team over the last 3 weeks, and the Packers have one of the better internal units in the NFL. They have a great pressure rate on the passer. They also play good in the cold, which is going to give you a couple bonus points coming into the later half of the fantasy football playoffs, because they will have an NFL real-life advantage over those teams that play in the warmth. But they are also top 10 in interceptions forced this year and points allowed to opposing offenses. And you can stream the Colts as another one if you can't get them. They put up a very impressive game against the Broncos with 7 fantasy points. They played decent. They did lose, but it could have been a lot worse in that matchup. So now coming into a matchup here against the Titans, this team just finished with 89 passing yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions against one of the worst defenses in the Bengals. They're allowing so many points and they barely put up any offense, so there's no need to worry if you're starting the Colts defense this week. And they also get the Giants the week after that in the fantasy football playoffs, so I would be stashing them as well. But that's going to finish off this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the waiver wire trap video coming tomorrow. You don't want to miss that, especially this late in the playoffs. All glory to the man above.